We are now going into the open portion. The board has spent the last hour in closed session discussing various items. It's just become known that we're having a little bit of a problem with our AV tonight, and prior to going into closed session, the board voted 6-0 to go into closed session. It was motioned, seconded, and voted to go into closed session. We lost that little bit on our video, but it will be in our minutes, and verbally I'm letting everybody know. We have tonight the Roosevelt School Boy Scout Troop and Kevin Dwyer, and welcome.
Thank you, and welcome to Roosevelt Elementary School. I'm Dr. Kevin Dwyer, school principal. And yes, I am thrilled to share with you our Roosevelt Scout Troop 201, which has a proud history for over 30 years of being associated with Roosevelt School, who will come forward and lead us in the presentation of the flags, as well as the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by our Pledge of Respect. Boys? Our caller is Ben McCarrick, and our flag holders are Will Hennigan and Logan Mauer.
Color guard attention. Color guard advance. Color guard halt. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now we'll say our Pledge of Respect together.
No.
Oh, we want to do
Color guard post collars. Now if we join in the Pledge of Respect.
Now we do the Pledge of Respect. I am a smart, special, valuable person.
I respect myself and I respect others. My words and actions are kind and honest. I accept only my best in all I do. I am proud to be me. Color guard salute. 2. Color guard dismissed.
Thank you. Roosevelt Scout Troop 201. Now it's my pleasure to briefly introduce you to our Roosevelt PTO and our PTO president, one of our co-presidents, Mrs. Basquin. Yeah. Come on forward.
Hi, I'm Bridget Basquin. I'm president, co-president here at Roosevelt of PTO. We just wanted to give you a little overview of what we've been doing the last year or so with our fundraising money from the Trackathon. We actually have our Trackathon coming up Friday, October 4th. It's one of our really great events that the kids really enjoy doing, and the Roosevelt families really get involved and pitch in. Last year we were able to purchase new furniture for the library and start our outdoor beautification project, which we've put in a new sign by the main entrance on Prospect. We've planted some lovely plantings around those signs. We were able to buy a new bench. We've got some brickwork laid out. We actually allowed the families to purchase bricks that they could engrave their names on. And so this is a project that we're going to continue working on, and we're going to use our funds that we raise. And our hope is that we do really well and are successful again this year. And ultimately, we'd like to get some new playground equipment for one of our 2 playgrounds. And so we're just really excited about that. And that's basically what I have to say. So thank you.
One of the features that I'll share with you this evening is the first month of school, and the new technology initiative well underway in all of District 64 schools, but through a brief video, I'll show you our first month of school through pictures and through words. As a disclaimer to the video, and I'm just going to open up my computer to get started, collaboration in the classroom is alive and well. And sometimes you'll see on the video pictures of this students using their laptops and Chromebooks or iPads. But what's not captured there, and that's my disclaimer, is that students are highly engaged with their teachers. There's a strong relationship, and there's lots of collaboration that goes on. And sit back and enjoy their video, our Chromebooks and technology in Roosevelt School.
We are delighted to be utilizing one-to-one technology with our intermediate students at Roosevelt School. During the first few weeks of school, we were focused on the logistics to get 336 Chromebooks in student hands. In addition, our parents expressed overwhelming support for this initiative by purchasing the cases and paying the allowance necessary to take the Chromebooks home. Organizing a system to distribute the Chromebooks required our staff to practice interdependence and to work together to make this happen. Utilizing the Chromebooks within the classroom challenges our faculty to be innovative in the use of this new instructional tool. Observing the students use the Chromebooks at school has simply been inspiring. Our teachers, parents, and students have a lot to say about our enhanced technology at Roosevelt.
The best part of having my Chromebook is that I can personalize it.
The best part of having my own Chromebook is I get to be innovative, play games, write music, and I also like that it is just me and I don't have to wait for a turn.
The best part of having my Chromebook is because we can take it home. It is the best because my brothers and I don't have to fight over our computer. My Chromebook makes me feel more confident when I do my work. The best part of having my own Chromebook is that you can learn new things that helps you get smarter. My Chromebook motivates me to be creative.
I like my Chromebook because it is a new chance to be responsible.
The best part of having my own Chromebook is that we never have to hope that the Chromebook card is open, so we always have access to it.
As a teacher, technology has allowed me to be more innovative with the information I can find on demand.
Technology empowers my students so each child has a voice in the classroom.
The use of technology has greatly impacted my approach to teaching. This shift has led me to develop some of the most innovative educational experiences, meaningful learning experiences that not only motivate my students, but leave a lasting impression long after they leave my classroom.
It's added excitement to doing homework. It's given it a new perspective for Sarah.
My Chromebook inspires me to do things I've never been able to do before.
Roosevelt School in our first month.
Thank you. As we do in all our open meetings, there is time set aside for public comments, and therefore this would be the time. If anybody has a statement to make on any item that is not on the agenda, please feel free to come up. Yes.
Good evening.
Hi.
Dr. Raleigh, board. As many of you know, I'm Angela Tuvo. I'm a field school parent, PTO committee chair, taxpayer, and I just had a couple comments I wanted to share with you guys. As you probably know, field school is totally cool.
Literally and figuratively?
Literally, yes. It's cool throughout the building now, thanks to the huge project that was approved by this board to implement a new HVAC system, which was implemented this summer. It's finally, not to use a Frozen pun, but for the first time in forever, it's actually cool throughout the building in the classrooms. It's a big deal at Field. If you recall last year, it was still in the 90s at this time, and we had to cancel school, kids weren't learning. So, while it is fun to talk textbooks and technology, those things don't add up to much if we don't have, air quality, health, safety, just the baseline for the classroom. So I guess my comment is thank you. Thank you to this Board of Education for approving that important project. Thank you to Scott Mackel and his team, and to Dr. Hines and her leadership for implementing and executing this huge project on time and under budget so that Field School was totally cool on day one. We really appreciate it. So on behalf of the I have permission from the Field School PTO board, and especially from the students of Field School. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
My name is Amy Kish, and I have a kindergartner at Franklin and a future kindergartner in 2016. And last spring there was a survey done for talking about full-day kindergarten, and I was at the board meeting, and this discussion was tabled until the new superintendent started. So I'm here trying to bring that conversation back into the board, the superintendent, the plans for the district. My daughter goes to Jefferson. I know there's community interest. I know there's not a wait list at Jefferson, so there's obviously interest there. I just wanted to make sure it got brought up and put on people's dockets again.
This is not a forum for discussion,
Right.
just to make statements. However, I do encourage you to reach out to speak to Dr. Heinz on this, on where this might come for the future before the board.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I did receive your email this afternoon, so it's on my list.
Any other comments? Okay, then we will roll right into our first item on the open agenda, Carpenter Construction Update. Scott.
Yes, thank you very much. I have with us Nick Jr. from Nicholas & Associates, and he'll give you an update on what's been going on over at Carpenter. And then if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them at the end.
Good evening. I'm happy to announce that we've started the work as of 9/15, so a week ago Monday. We broke down, like previous board meeting, I said we would break down the Farnsworth report into task items and start tracking them. The first major task item was getting an updated air and water test and balance report, which we did get from F.E. Moran. It went to Fannie Howey Associates and then to our staff, and review has been ongoing with that. Fannie Howey has responded that with comments to make adjustments to valves and dampers and things like that, and all of that work is in play now. The second major task item was Zone 3. Zone 3's been non-operational for 3 weeks, a month and a half, there we go. And 2 compressors along with 2 strainers needed to be ordered from LG. The second compressor will be in F.E. Moran's shop Thursday of this week. They'll flush the system because there was contaminants in the system from when the compressors were burned up previously. So they'll start that process of cleaning out the system, installing the compressors, installing the strainers next week, and getting Zone 3 up and running. That's really important because we can't start the control or implement a control integration with the LG Smart System and with the Delta control system until that Zone 3 is fully functional. So again, it's a sequential order that we got to work through this, and being that LG is an overseas manufacturer, some of the stuff was stuck overseas and is now literally showing up this week and will be installed right away. The cooling tower loads have been reviewed by Fannie Howie. Fannie Howie's response came back with, from an engineering standpoint, the cooling tower is sufficient and will work. We are running our own calculations on that to verify that. That information came out late Thursday, so our guys have dove into the reports this weekend, and early reviews say yes, they concur with that, but I'm holding it till they get something formal back to us. But everything's ongoing, going to the fact that Field School now is cool. We hope to make Carpenter cool very soon, and like I said at the last meeting, I think 4 weeks start to finish, we're going to be having the system working efficiently and then tackle the heating element side once the weather drops a little bit.
Has there been any problems, unanticipated concerns that have popped up?
No, all the manufacturers and the vendors under Effie Moran's scope have been very responsive. We've put forth in front of them pretty rigid dates to return time, information, deadlines. Some of them maybe were a little bit unrealistic on our part, but we wanted to set the bar high, get them motivated out there to know this isn't going to go on 2 or 3 months. We want to get in and out and get the system that you all paid for or are paying for up and running. So, no, everybody's been very cooperative and no issues whatsoever so far.
Thank you. Any other questions by the board regarding the Carpenter program? Okay.
Okay, we'll stay on top of it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have a little shift. If you go to number 3 on your packet, District 64 Financial Dashboard Update to reflect the 14-15 budget will be done prior to actual discussion of the budget. And that will be conducted by Becky.
You can always phone a friend.
So in your packet tonight is that an updated financial dashboard. The changes between what you saw the last board meeting, and this is just that we updated 6-day enrollment, and page 1 was updated to make sure that if projects had been completed, then we marked them such. So the reason that we've got this up here is so that we can show not only the board where to find it on the webpage, but if anybody in the audience is interested in being able to look at this at various times. So if you go to our front page and go under departments, this is really easy. Business services. And on the far right side, you'll see District 64 Board Operating Plan. And click on that. And you have several choices. You can download the entire copy of the report. And look at it in this format. Looking for the scroll bar there. Oh.
Grab it on the right and kind of move it
Oh, there you
left
go.
a little, and you'll see there.
Oh, there you go. You can either download the entire report, or if you just want to look at certain pages, you can click on that. And if you were interested in reading the board's consensus goals, from goals to action plans and how we're going to measure the success of those, you can do that. If you wanted to I'm a PC user, so this is not, I'm showing my incompetence here. If you were interested in the financials, the revenues or the expenditures, or the last page, which shows what our future anticipated resources are needed for capital improvements, and/or the page, the information that I think is important in this report and important for the community to know what our days cash on hand are through the board's consensus goal of extending the referendum commitment to the year 2021. Remembering what our board policy is, that we have 120 days cash on hand at the end of the fiscal year. You can see that in 2021, we make it with little room to spare, but we do have 120. Currently projecting, all things being equal, i.e. the CPI behaves the way we think it should, we would have 125 days cash on hand. The biggest variable in calculating days cash on hand is property taxes as a revenue source and salaries as an expenditure. So those variables will change as new information becomes available. We update this report twice a year. Basically at budget adoption, which we're doing tonight, and then when we do financial projections for the board in February. And that's based upon that December important information for CPI that's issued late January. And so that we bring back the financial projections and do a detailed report to the board based upon the issuance of the Consumer Price Index. Questions on this, where it's at on the webpage?
Let me just update Dan. Dan, we had a small tutorial by Becky on how to find the board operating plan, also known, AKA the Collins report. We can find it on the web now, and it has been updated.
Oh, that's great.
Any questions by the board on this revised operating plan? The one thing I thought would be helpful, Beck, on the actual numbers that I'm seeing, little notation, I'm suspecting that all of these are in millions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I did some quick addition, though, and I did notice that the numbers are not exactly the same numbers that are in the budget document.
They will be rounded slightly different when you round
Slightly
them.
different. Okay.
And Becky, I've just got a question with the looking at the expenses, and just as we're projecting out, and I'm not suggesting any changes to the budget, but in the purchase services and supplies for 2016 and 2017, we're not projecting any growth in those, even though it seems like looking at the past, there's been sort of an increased cost there, and just wondering if you could share thoughts on that.
Well, you can tell that we're going from a very large number in those categories down to the basic increase that we've had over the last several years. That will fluctuate between those two categories and based upon need. There will be discussions in the next several years as to, with the use of Chromebooks, where we can reduce our expenditures in consumables, in paper, in textbooks. Those discussions will happen over the next couple of years, and that's why those increases aren't there, because it's very likely that we will be able to reduce the budget in those areas. But that's discussions that will happen between the administrative team and then here at the board level.
Thank you.
And one final question from me, Beck. On the projected revenues, I did an analysis, or just added up the 4 years of projected increases in revenues. It's 6.63%. And, you know, in this economy, that would be wonderful thinking, but I was interested in how you projected those increases. For instance, 15-16 was a 2.8% increase, followed by a 3.1% increase, followed by a 0.3% increase. And I remember at one point that you were utilizing 1.52, 1.52 alternating.
Correct.
So I didn't understand how these numbers correlated to that.
Well, if you look at the top line, property taxes, you'll see that we're projecting for 15-16, which is after this budget year, a 2.8% increase, a 3.1, and a 0.3. And that's really, the further out you get, the more difficult it is to predict what's going to happen in the economy. Sure. And again, the property taxes have been factored in at collecting the extension beam, which is a calendar number versus a fiscal year number, 1.5 to 1.5 2. And you can see the rest of the numbers are either zero increases and or slight declines.
Okay. Any other questions by the board?
Didn't we discuss having a more frequent update on part of this, the aggregate view and the day's cash on hand? I think we came to some kind of consensus about that, did we not?
Well, I guess the question begs, when will the next update be?
February.
In February.
Correct.
Dan, what was your opinion on when this was, or what was your recollection on when this report was going to be updated?
I was under the impression that we were going to try to do it quarterly.
Yeah, I seem to
Whenever new
recall
information
something.
came in, that was my impression.
Well, at our last meeting, we talked about this a little bit, and I think it was the opinion of a number of us that we ought to have this updated frequently enough so that whenever we make a major financial decision, that we know what the effect on this trend line is going to be before we make the decision. Now, Becky, I understand right now, your plan, and you have not been instructed otherwise, is to do it twice a year. I think it's pretty clear that a majority of the board would like to see it done more often. And, I think Dr. Hines and Becky, you guys are just going to have to figure out, given what you've heard at the board table, what your plans are going to be.
I wouldn't anticipate prior to February major decisions being made by this board. From an expenditure standpoint, since we're just adopting the budget tonight, that February time frame, I would agree with you between February and June. It could be probably updated every month as you make decisions. In fact, a large expenditure comes before you as a board, we typically have come back and said what the effect on the day's cash on hand would be. And I would expect to continue to operate that way.
Yeah, and
But
I think that's,
officially, we do it twice a year.
and at least on my part, that's the desire, so that, if we are asked to do a textbook adoption or we're asked to do a major facilities project, that we get not only the dollar amount of the first year, which is often what we get in terms of an estimate, but that we also get to see what happens to the trend line. And I agree with you, we're unlikely between now and February to have to deal with that. But, I think there is support by at least a majority of the board to have it whenever we make a major decision.
I should point out that the day's cash on hand does not include the capital projects fund, because the bond sale would tend to skew those numbers and those lines. So that day's cash on hand does not include the bond sale and the dollars that will fund our capital projects from a facility standpoint over the next several years.
One of the things we talked about on Thursday evening when we were together as a board was the possibility of creating some type of a digital dashboard using, whether it be our new web system or an additional vendor to come in and create a digital dashboard that would be more responsive to those expenditures. So that is something we will be continuing to talk about this year to see if that's something we can make happen for the future, because the board, as you've heard, does want the graphs and the amounts to be as real-time as possible within how we operate budgets within a school district.
So suffice it to say, Beck, if there is something momentous that comes before us, we'll make those necessary changes.
And we typically have done that.
We also, sorry to interrupt you, we also discussed having somewhere on the website the date that it has been updated, so that when people go on there, they know how fresh the data are.
think that's on the cover
it on there?
page, yeah. I can figure out how to do this again.
It says updated
it's
on
on the-
September 22nd.
Okay,
First page,
great,
yeah.
great, thank you.
You can tell I'm a PC user, so.
And then one additional question. So this is going to be available not only to the board now, but it's also available to the public now, right?
Right, it's on the-
Included, like in any board decks or anything that we hand out, or we'll put it out on the website for people to see. I mean, it's two-part, the goal is, right? The first part, I'm glad to see that we're having a nice discussion on it. It's bubbling up some very good questions. But the second part is, it's a quick way for a community member to see what's going on. But we're going to have that available out on the web now and in our decks going forward, right?
Correct, and
Yes.
thank you to Bernadette Trim and Allison Blum for making this happen between Thursday night and Monday night. It's a very short turnaround, but they made it happen. So
it's
thank you.
great. It's already done.
And thanks for all your efforts. I know you did most of the heavy lifting, and so I thank you.
Now, this is a team effort.
Okay, any other comments on the operating report? And if not, I'd like to move right into the next part of our agenda, which is a very important part. It's the adoption of the budget for the coming year. Becky will give us a quick synopsis and summary, if you will, and I'll entertain any questions or comments by the board. And it's an action item.
Thank you for allowing me to do that first, because that was the thing I was most nervous about. So, with that being said, tonight we're asking the Board of Education to adopt the budget for the 2014-15 school year. You as a board have had lengthy discussions in May, July, and on September 8th about what goes into this budget, the changes that have been made, truly trying to make this a transparent process. But in fact, we as an administrative team have been working on this since last December. The process for the 2015-16 budget has already begun, because Scott and I have already put out our feelers about internally what capital projects we'll be doing next year. You know that we've allocated $500,000 for Scott to do internal projects, carpeting, concrete repairs, asphalt repairs, those types of projects. And so we're already out there starting to do our due diligence and trying to determine what's going to happen next year. So the budget process, although we're concluding it with the adoption of 14-15 this year, it really never ends. It's a continuous process and continuous conversations with the parties that are affected by this. In your packet tonight, with a cover memo, I responded to some of the questions that were asked at the last board meeting. Dr. Borelli, you wanted to know the changes between draft 1, draft 2, and draft 3. That is the first response into those questions. You also were interested in adding some footnotes to the statement of position about the capital projects. I will address that in a second when we get to that particular document. You asked that we back out the June 30th actuals, backing out the duplicate bond sales transactions, and we have done that. And Board Member Collins asked that the above information be incorporated into the yellow revenue and expense sheets, and we have done that, and we will go through those in just a second. It's also take note that we have the audited numbers. We don't have the actual audit yet, but we do have the audited beginning numbers for going forward for 2014-15, and the auditors always come in and find something that needs to be reversed or added or some shape or fashion, and so that the beginning cash and investment balances have been adjusted. And the same would hold true with the state board document that we have to submit, which will go tomorrow after we adopt it this evening. On page 1 of the charts, it's the statement of position, and this outlines all of our fund. On the far left-hand side are the funds that are indicated. We begin with the beginning cash and investment balances. We add revenues, we take away expenditures, and it shows an excess deficiency of revenues over expenditures, and then an estimate estimate of what we believe the cash and investment balance will be on June 30th, 2015. There are several green lines in this document. The first one is the subtotal of the operating funds, and that includes the education fund, the tort immunity fund, the operation and maintenance fund, transportation, retirement, and working cash. We anticipate in those funds that we will show a slight surplus of $640,709. And then we add in the capital projects. We have a large beginning fund balance because of the bond sale that we did in March. And we expect to deficit spend in the capital projects not only this year but next year and the following year until those funds have been expended, because that was the intent of the bond sale, to fund our future capital improvements projects. You'll notice there are two asterisks in that particular line. One, that it's capital projects, that the June 30th capital projects fund balance of 9.1 is a result of an $8.6 million bond sale in the spring of 2014. And the deficit number has two asterisks, and it says the capital project fund expenses will draw down on the 9.1 million fund balance, causing the fund to deficit spend until the bond proceeds of $8.6 million have been expended. And so then that gives you a total of the operating funds. Then we add in debt service. And debt service is the fund that the county clerk extends on our behalf for the dollars that are needed to make our principal and interest payments on the debt that we have incurred as a district. And then we get to the total all funds. So tonight we're asking the board to adopt a budget that has revenues of $73,720,564, less expenditures of $78,637,869. And if you're looking at total all funds, we are actually deficit spending, because of the capital projects fund, of $4,917,305. Now, as we go through the yellow documents, as I referred to earlier, you're going to find these same numbers as we move forward through them. So if you turn to page 2 and 3, those are the expenditures, and what this document does for you is give you a historical perspective by fund, by major object category. So, for instance, if you were looking on page 2 at the top in the education fund, you can see a historical perspective on what we have spent on salaries since 2010-11, all the way through the tentative budget of 2014-15. And then it will go down for each category: salaries, employee benefits, purchase services, supplies and materials, capital outlay, and other expenses. And that does it by fund to give you as a board or the community extensive knowledge on how we spend our resources in District 64. I would remind you what Mr. Heidi said a couple of board meetings ago. We used to adopt the budget based upon these two sheets, not the detail that you have received over the last several months. You can see that we added at the bottom of page 3 where the bond sale adjustments have been backed out, so that you can see a fair comparison of what our expenditures are increasing. And once those entries are backed out, it's a 6.3% increase in all funds for District 64. On page 4 and 5 is the same type of comparison for revenues. It goes down by each fund. And on page 5 at the top, you'll see the total operating funds, then you'll see where we add debt service, and then you will see totals of all funds. And then again, those adjustments backing out the double entries that are required by the State Board of Education for the particular bond sales that we did last spring. And then Dr. Barrella, you asked me to update that sheet that we had done, I think April or May, I can't remember the first time we presented this to the board, showing the effects of the bond sales by fund, exactly what happened. And that is that last page there, page 6, shows you how we ended June 30th, 2014. And then the next 38 pages, and I won't go by those line by line to save you some wear and tear, is the legal budget that we will file with the State Board of Ed. Once you make your motions and once you adopt the budget and your votes are cast, then we fill this in tomorrow and we submit it electronically to the State Board of Education.
Any questions or comments by the board? I was going through this over the weekend, looking at these numbers, and I was thrown off course. Thank you, Becky, for your intercession. I had included in the expenditures the debt fund, which is abrogated out. That's separate, and after Becky explained it to me, and I realized it, and of course all the numbers fell together after I subtracted the capital outlay and the debt service. So thank you for clarifying that.
No problem.
And one final thing I want to clarify, there was some comment made about the change in budgets from version 1 to 2 to 3. In version 2 to 3, there was a decrease in revenue of $128,340, increase of expenditures of $916,730. However, both of those figures were not necessarily known until close to the opening of school, correct?
You're absolutely correct.
And the expenditures primarily were in the area of transportation.
Correct.
Which obviously we wouldn't have known until the week before.
Correct.
And the Chromebooks.
Correct.
Which this board voted on to prevent an increase in student fees.
Correct.
And that, of course, was done in
July,
the end of July, I believe. So,
the same night that you were looking at draft 2.
yes. All right.
So, Tony, that was one of the questions I had, and that I was kind of going to build on your question you had there. So, the difference between the drafts was $2 million.
Basically.
So we're saying that about 500,000 of that was Chromebooks,
About, yeah.
and then how much of that was transportation?
$250,000.
All right, and then what was the balance?
Minor changes, if you'll recall, the last board book had itemized all changes in excess of $10,000. And if you could be patient with me, I will flip to that. It's the goldenrod document. We added salary information that was not known by draft 2, some administrative changes, so another $150,000 went to additional increases in the salary areas. And $200,000 in Title I changes. So there were some changes plus and minus netting out to that number.
Okay, thanks.
And just so we know that the final change between budgetary presentation number 1 and budgetary process number 3 showed an increase of $509,758 in revenue, increase of $2,001,894 in expenditures, right. A net delta of approximately $1.5 million.
Right.
Yeah. Any other comments or concerns on behalf of the board? As this is a budget item and up for approval, if there's no other discussion, I would take a motion for this budget.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, adopt a budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2014, and ending June 30, 2015, as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, starting on Dathan's side.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
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 Dan?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky.
We will jump ahead on our agenda to the 6th day of enrollment report.
There are 2 times that we officially count students. The first one is the 6th day of enrollment, and the second one is for the State Board of Education, and most reports that the state uses enrollment numbers for on September 30th. But we tend to compare, and when Dr. Casarda does the demographic report, he always comes back to the 6th day enrollment. We had 4,374 students, which is 31 students greater than the June 2014 enrollments. We have 42 more students at the elementary level, and we have 11 less students at the middle school. According to the demographic report that Dr. Casarda completed last fall, we have a variance of 15 students, 15 more students than Dr. Casarda had projected a year ago. And it's important to note that enrollment changes every month. There are several attachments. I know people like to look at numbers in various shapes and fashion, and so you have multiple ways to look at the enrollment numbers. That first document, typically when you see this, when we're going through budget adoption and staffing, we have what we call bubbles wrapped around some of these sections. But this is the way the district looked on September 6th. And then it shows a comparison on the back side of that particular sheet, showing at the K-5 level comparisons between this year and last year, not only enrollment, class sections, and number of the changes that are there. And then the blue document is, again, the typical report that we publish every month for internal use. And the final page in that packet is Dr. Casarda's most likely scenario that was included in the demographic report last fall.
Any comments on the 6-day enrollment report?
One question, Becky. You know, it looks like if we are overrunning the Series B projection that Dr. Casarda had, my recollection was he also had a Series C projection, which was higher than his Series B.
It would have been 10% higher than this.
Are we, okay, so it's 10%.
Right.
I haven't done the math, but are we pretty close to his
No.
Series C?
No.
Okay, we're still below that.
It's way below.
What would your thoughts be as far as projections for the future? Would you go back to his Series B and just follow it in the future, or would you bump his Series B up a little bit?
I tend to follow Series B. He may be up and down, but over the long run, he is pretty accurate in his projections.
So if you were doing a financial projection for next year or the year after, you would assume essentially that this year is a fluke?
Plus or minus, and you may have less
Yeah,
students
sure.
next year than projected. And over time, I think that balances out.
Becky, at what point would you go to Series C? Would you do it at the, if it's 10% before you go to the other one, would you start looking at it at 5.01% increase?
Typically, we'll watch those new developments that are coming into Park Ridge, those high rises and those condos, and looking at the students that we start to draw from there and when we start to draw from them, and adjust accordingly.
Looks like there's plenty of wiggle room. There's 430 students that we can play with there.
Correct.
But I'm just wondering, because that leads me into the concern that I have that is found on this page that shows the capacity of the buildings. And I know that most of the construction that's going on right now will primarily affect field, and according to this, field's at 82% capacity. I'm mostly concerned with Washington, which is at 86% capacity. So do we see any of that potential growth occurring at Washington, which would be the number one area of concern, followed by field, and how do we plan for expansion of facility at field?
I think those discussions that we're going to be having in the next several months that deal with the facility master plan, formerly what we used to refer to as the educational adequacy study, that's where you will drill down and answer those questions and look at that. I have to tell you that building capacity number is an architectural number. It's really, it's not the most accurate way to look at capacity, because if you walk through those buildings, I don't find a square inch of open space in those buildings.
You know, I guess suffice to say, at least for my concern, would be as we look at the facility master plan, I would not want us to assume that Dr. Casarda's Series B projections will be correct in the future and find out that what we're seeing this year is just the beginning of a run of over projection years that in the end, you know, in other words, I don't want us to fail to recognize a crowding problem until it's too late.
My most recent experience with projections and facilities would have been in Geneva, so I'm going back a couple of years. but we tended to build towards Series 3, his high-end projection, and hope that we only got B, so that we had room to have some flexible spaces.
So is this the projection study here, is this, was a point in time and we're just in possession of it, it doesn't get updated based on changes?
Dr. Casardo, we tend to go back every 5 years and have Dr. Casardo update the projections, and we just did it last fall.
And that was done after 4 years.
And just to catch you up, Dr. Cassard is a professional demographer that a number of school districts hire to do this periodically. And so, rather than incur the cost to do it every year, we've done it every 5 years or so for a while.
He's out of the University of North Carolina.
Thank you.
Well known.
Becky, my question is about Franklin, and I know I read something about it, but maybe just for clarification. They went down in enrollment, and they went up in classrooms. Everyone else that went down in enrollment went down in classrooms?
Sometimes I lean to Mr. Heidi to help me explain this. It depends on where your sections, your number of students are at what grade level, and how many sections they had last year. Franklin's usually pretty low on class sections, so if they went one over our guideline, we would have to add an additional section, and that's exactly what happened to us the first day of school at second grade.
Okay, and that's why they have the low 18.25.
I think we discussed this before. It's not that we have to, but it's a
our
consideration.
Right, we decide if we're going to open a section or if we're going to add a TA to support the teacher. And in this case, we chose, based on conversations we had with the second grade teachers, letters from the fine arts teachers, and looking at the data in this particular group of students, that it would be wise to go ahead and open a fourth section after a few weeks of school.
But it's probably worth noting that it's only discretionary after the first day of school. So the day before the first day of school, it has been this district's unwritten policy, as long as I've been aware of it, to automatically add when they go over the maximum. This board obviously could change that, and I'm not sure I like that policy particularly, but that's always been the policy.
When Mr. Martin and I looked back and we kind of pulled the principals, we asked some teacher reps within the buildings to kind of think back 5 to 7 years. There were some grade levels at the junior high, and I think even one in the elementary, that decided they wouldn't want to split a section. They would rather take the TA support. So Mr. Martin put that information together, and then from this point forward, we're going to start to really document those cases and how the decision fell and why it fell that way. So, because the past practice was kind of all over.
Yeah.
It's hard for your finance person to sit here and say it's not just about numbers, but it's not about numbers. It's about the students, the size of the classroom, and what's best for that particular class size and section at that particular point in time. It's about kids.
And Beck, that may answer part of my question, because I noted that there was an increase overall of 5 sections, and yet only 4 FTE staff members. So would that fifth one be covered by by the assistant, or the numbers didn't equal out? That's why I'm asking.
Help me out.
Well, I added, unless my math was off, I added 5 new sections and 4 new PREA members, staff members.
Well, I think as we move forward with the agenda, Mr. Martin is going to be talking about staffing and numbers, and in regards to increased enrollment, those two topics actually go together. So. Okay. And then the final thing is, on the operating report, there was a 48 student increase from last year to this year, and yet on your report here is 31. I'll have to go back and look at that. Please. Okay. And I will correct it if it's wrong. What's that? And I will correct it if it's wrong. Yeah. All right. Any other comments, concerns, questions?
Yeah, Tony, this is Dan. And I don't know if the administration's looking for comments from the board on this or not, but my thoughts on the maximum class size, I know a couple other board members mentioned their thoughts on it. I'm consistent with, I see that as black and white. I think one of the important reasons that people put value in the schools in District 64 based on the class sizes. Any educator I've ever spoken with talks about the importance of smaller class sizes. And so I look at those maximum class size numbers as black and white. And so that's my thought. I wouldn't be for increasing them, and I like the administration's thought when there's an opportunity that they're going to go above, we don't do that. So those are just my thoughts.
Dr. Hines, is there any thought about having a discussion on that in the near future on our policy? No, it's not a policy. On our practice of our class size?
I know we've entertained some conversation, and we just have to decide if we're going to do that now or if we're going to do that at a later time next year.
So it will potentially be a board discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks,
All right.
Tony.
You bet. Any other questions or concerns? And if not, I'd like to roll into our next topic, which would be administration to student ratio comparison. About 2 months ago, I asked Joel to craft this report, and let me start off by saying thank you, because it took some research and time and diligence to do this. I remember first getting on the board hearing John say he was concerned about numbers creep at that time, and it took me about 1.5 years to realize what he was talking about. But this report shows fairly clearly the number of staff to student, administration to student. So, Joel, if you could take us through it, I'd be interested.
Okay, as you see in front of you, you have a chart of the administration to student ratio comparisons for 25 surrounding districts. If you look at what I did was polled surrounding districts, polled information to get their total administrative count, with the exception of the director of facilities, which most districts did not count and did not want to include with, so we took that out to make it uniform across the board. So this does not include that position. But if you look at the positions that were provided, you will see that the ratios range from a minimum of 1 to 91 students to a maximum of 1 to 222 students, or the 25 districts. Park Ridge falls 7th on that list with an administrator per pupil ratio of 1 administrator for every 205.9 students. And we sit with 21 total administrators. You'll see, and I know the numbers don't bear this out, but the consistency of what you see within the central offices, are your superintendent, assistant superintendent for students, HR, special education, and the growing one most common is technology. In addition to that, what you will find, some of your other districts will have more coordinators that are kept under the central office umbrella. You will have some of them that will have some type of director that has a split between ESL services depending on the districts that they are in. Some of them will have that tied even into food services depending on maybe their socioeconomic and if they do a lot of hot lunches and or morning breakfast programs. But I think getting back to the main point, you'll see that we're sitting, as far as our comparables, we're towards the top end with our administrator to per pupil ratio. On the flip side of that document, I provided a little brief history of some of the administrative additions in our district throughout the years, such as you'll see that the director of technology position showed up in 1998, 99. That's central office stayed at that number until this past year when we hired the assistant director of special education pupil services. You'll see that Roosevelt here was the school that had the lone elementary principal, assistant principal for many years until we started adding assistant principals at our other elementary schools back in 2008. And pretty much the middle schools have always had the assistant principals, and that pretty much rounded us out with our administrative staff.
Joe, just to clarify something you said there, you said we were on the top end of the ratios. I take that to mean that we actually have a large number of students per administrator. In other words,
yeah,
we're pretty light on administrators. We're not heavy on
correct.
Administrators.
Yes, that was my intent. Thank you.
Joe, I just had a question. So do the, when people look at this or something in the central office, so there's more individuals working at the central office here than just 7 people, right? I mean, we have other staff members.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So do people not look at that, or is that not available information? And I don't know what the intent was when the question was asked here, if it was more at sort of as the
It was
defined
administrative
here.
to student ratio was the request to make sure we weren't getting top heavy.
However, the corollary is worth discussion. What about the support staff and the central office? And are we top-heavy in that area?
I don't know what the comparables are as far as our secretarial support staff within our district. Yeah, that's something I did not look at.
Yeah, I didn't ask for that and didn't expect that. However, as you point out very well, that that would be the corollary question to this, to see how heavily staffed we are or understaffed we are with support folks.
I mean, it may come out the same. I would have thought it was more a question of from sort of a administration perspective, which I would have just thought of the office in my mind. How many people did we have there, versus other school districts?
You're absolutely right, and I should have included that. But I would hope to have. Joel, is there is that a reasonable question to ask to see if we can find out what our staffing levels are at?
Can I answer that part of that first? We have to be careful how frequently we're going back to all these districts, because we've been asking districts for a variety of information to report out kind of roughshod, and it does take time, and it pulls people in other districts kind of away from their tasks to respond to Joel. They've been playing pretty nicely with us. We get between 20 and 25 districts that will respond when he puts out a listserv. So we'll have to just figure out how essential. Remember when we talked about essential to know, nice to know, need to know now? Where are we with that information in terms of its level of importance?
And I personally don't think it's absolutely critical. I think it would be a nice to know report over the next several months to 6 months, that kind of a thing. But I think that I believe that we should have an understanding of the level of staffing in this district, the need for more staffing, because it correlates directly with the level of expenses.
Joel, if I may, an observation and a question. The observation I had was that when I weed out the smaller districts and look primarily at the districts of 3,000 some, 4,000 some, and above that in terms of number of students, it looks like we are in the middle of a large group of districts that have pretty similar administrator to student ratios, and that was comforting. The one real outlier that I saw was Arlington Heights District 59, which is bigger than us and has almost double the administrators per pupil that we have. And I'm just curious whether you know anything about what their thinking is or what they are trying to accomplish. And I don't mean to be even slightly snarky about that. I'm just kind of curious as to what they're up to and whether that's something interesting or not. If you know, and it may not have come up even in your research.
The only thing that I can attest that to is they have more schools. If I just go strictly by the numbers where they have 14 principals, I'm assuming that they have 14 schools. I don't know that district well. I do know, obviously, my counterpart over there, but that's just my immediate guess is they just, for whatever reason, based on their population, they have probably more schools, smaller populations at those schools.
Okay. And I guess just one other comment. I have two contradictory thoughts on administrators per student. The one that I hold most of the time is that I would prefer to keep the number of administrators reasonably low compared to other districts, just for the simple idea of saving money. But the other somewhat contradictory thought that I think we all at least need to remember is that teacher evaluations are becoming much more rigorous and much more time-consuming. And, it does worry me from time to time when we have a single administrator evaluating, say, 50 people. And supposedly it's supposed to be a meaningful evaluation, that will, determine somebody's rating and riffing possibilities. Maybe at some point in the future will determine their salary going forward. And I do worry that, I don't think entities in the private sector have managers managing 50 direct reports. So in some sense of the word, probably every public school district is incredibly light on management. And while I would not propose that we go out and double our administrators, at least not this year, I wouldn't propose that. It's something we need to keep an eye on.
Any other comments? Again, thank you, Joel, for getting this and presenting it to us tonight. The flip side of this would be student enrollment and staff allocations.
Yep, and I gave everybody a revised one, so at their table, so make sure you're looking at the right one when it's. You'll see revised in the upper right-hand corner under Appendix 6. Okay, I'll assume everybody's with me. Just for the sake of that, I'm not sure how familiar everybody is. I'm going to give probably a little process at the beginning that kind of leads us through the steps. If this becomes too monotonous for people, somebody can just wave at me and tell me to be quiet. But I thought I would begin just a little bit on how the whole process falls out, so to speak, through the course of a year. We come to the Board of Education in generally February with the tentative staffing for the following school year. For the 15-16 school year, we would be coming in February of 2015, in which we talk to the board about specific new positions that we'd be looking at, and be wanting to bring on board, and we would also be then bringing forward reductions and or based on enrollments where we think we're going to be down, and asking about contingencies on where we think we might be for bubbles. Normally those rifts or reductions that'll affect staff are caused by simply numbers, unless there's something within programming that we know is changing substantially. And so at that, we will start the initial process of our staffing. Our staffing of determining who is RIFT does not become set till further in the year, till after evaluations are completed, after we've received letters from staffing in March, from teachers determining whether they're on leave and they want to come back. At that point, we begin to build the process of how many teachers will actually be RIFT and who they are. They're notified in March or April of the school year. We do RIF our part-time staff, and we do that in particular because we're never sure exactly what percentage they will be for the following year until things often are fully staffed, or we get to that point during the year when we have a much better understanding. So at any given year, we usually, if the enrollment is going down, obviously will be reduction in force of our teachers and part-time staff. Obviously, if staff increases, if we're going up, we would be looking at adding staff. Then what happens is we start to play the waiting game. And what we have is our enrollment ports, which we have bubble sections, and maybe you've seen those before where the enrollments come out, and we have particular grade levels at classes that are circled, and they're identified as bubbles. Bubbles are classes that are within 2 students of going over our class size guideline, and we keep an eye on those positions. Once one of those positions goes over the enrolled, so for example, if it's kindergarten and it's 22 and we go to 23, 24, and those range, and we were to burst a bubble, as we call it, we then at the building level, the principals, this year they did it via email and phone calls, would contact all of the parents, double checking to say, listen, are you coming in the fall? When we have confirmation from all the parents at that grade level in that building, then we look at adding a staff member. Generally, as it's been this last couple of years, we look at recalling staff first for those positions. Once recalled staff has been hired. Then if we have any bubbles that burst beyond that, then we would look at hiring new staff. The caveat to that is obviously if we were to have something that we needed to add that was particularly, RIF teachers did not have a certification for, if for something that might occur. But that's kind of a real quick in the nutshell process of how it happens, and I'm sure, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I know it's much more complicated than that, but I tried to give a little bit of a process. What you have before you, and I guess I should stop. Is there any questions over that before I continue? Okay, so what you have before you is a quick 4-year look at where we are, and I'm going to focus on the FTE and the change because I think at this point that's where this discussion and what people are interested in. So if you look over the course of the 4 years, you'll see that in 11-12 we added 7.03 staff, in 12-13 we added 8.33, in 2013-14 it was 9.57, and then this past year it was 1.8. Now those numbers can be somewhat misleading because if you look at any point in grade level, some of those numbers are explained out by predetermined staffing that we have asked for, such as in the year of 11-12, we asked for 3.5 staff members up front, which were the tech coaches and band and orchestra. Now, obviously, that can be affected by the total RIF and callback, and what you'll see is for any given year, that combination of contingencies or bubbles that have burst along with the additions which have caused us to be up. Now, those could be down. Unfortunately for me tonight, they're all up. So I get the fun of saying that it's working against us, those bubble sections, but for the last couple of years, they have been working against us in that regard. So if you look at the last page, or the last summary there, over the last 4 years, we've added 26.73 staff members. Of that, 17.70 we knew were coming, were approved, and then the rest were the contingencies or bubbles that have burst over the course of the last 4 years, or an average, basically, if you were to average it out, of about 2.25 bubbles. Now, it doesn't always work out that way to the average. As we know, for this past year was 1.8. Some years it's been 3, 3.5. Some years it's been smaller. But that's where we sit currently.
You know, Joel, every time I look at this stuff, my eyeballs roll back in my head. I find it hard to understand how if student enrollment goes down 48, we go up 8 in staff. And I guess what you're saying is the devil's in the details in this report, and that looking at the raw number is not really telling the whole story. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. But it's interesting to note the trend. I mean, student enrollment has been up 170 students in the last 2 years, including this year, 3 years, and we've increased staff 18. So if the enrollment is up 170 or 180 divided by 18 staff members, I mean, that's a class size of about 10 per class. But you can't look at it that way, is that right?
Correct. You know, and I know it was brought up once before, but I think this is a critical aspect. You know, it's not how many kids leave or how many kids come, it's where they come. You know, and in particular, our first, and I know this doesn't always bear out year to year, but our most volatile grade levels are our kindergarten and our first grade. For example, you're guessing on those, and I know we have some kindergarten, first grade teachers in the room who will tell you, you know, kindergarten you don't know until they decide to enroll. In first grade, we have many students who don't come for kindergarten who will go to an all-day kindergarten somewhere else and then show up for first grade. And so many times as why we have those contingencies and why it seems like we are playing a guessing game, and we are to some degree, is because we just don't know. And it is based on what we have and then the unknown. In our particular last couple year stretch, we have had the students move in at the right grade levels. That has caused us to pop bubbles and rehire staff. Now, I would say from probably a building community perspective, I think people are very happy with the size of where our class size guidelines are, of where our staffing has probably been. The unfortunate aspect of that, looking at it on paper, it never looks good when we seem to be adding staff. But again, it's where the kids come, and if they come at the right grade levels in the right buildings, and we go over our class size guidelines, we will add teachers.
Hey, Joel, I just wanted to ask a question. So in your general information section here, and you talk about when we add a new section at a grade level, the district will need to add special sections, art, music, PE, etc. And then this results in an increase in the number of the current staff's FTE. Is that so say you add a section, would it be, I understand that then there's another class that goes to PE, another
Correct.
class that goes, and so is the impact there that whoever's teaching some of those things, art, music, or whatever, is it that they would just be performing more work, be a bigger FTE number, or do we actually end up hiring a whole other person?
Oftentimes, we end up, a lot of the part-time staff that we talked about are special people in the areas of literacy, CFC, music, Spanish, arts, I'm missing one, PE. And oftentimes those become, as we said, because we don't know from year to year the volatility of the staffing, that those will often be the percentages that will go up or down. So the answer to that is yes. As we add those positions, we often have to, or almost always have to, add to our music PE special departments. And generally, that is affected by our part-time people, most often.
Thank you.
Joel, I looked back at the 6-day enrollment sheet that was included in our packets, specifically the blue one, and when I compared the current guidelines to the current enrollment, I noticed we're getting up there with our numbers. There's in other words, there's not a lot of wiggle room. So it's
Yep.
just looking at this where I'm anticipating some bubbles bursting for next year.
Well, we have some concerns of areas of size of buildings and classes and things, and I don't know, Dr. Hines, if you want to talk about some of those, or if you would like me to just...
Really, these were the classes that we were watching over the summer when I was reporting to you in my Friday memos, that we were really watching because we knew we were about one away. And then in the spring, we started working with the principals and Scott Mackel and the chief custodians in the buildings to have alternative spaces. If all of these bubble classes popped at the grade levels and in the buildings we were watching and anticipating might, would we have enough room for all of these children? So they had contingency plans, which is part of the reason as we moved to a conversation about whether or not to engage in a master facility study, with one of those pieces being educational adequacy. Do we have the physical space, not the architectural numbers, but the physical space to run the types of programs we need to? Where are we with that? And if we needed to add, additions and whatnot, that's all part of the conversation. We are getting close in a lot of spots, and I know the principals are worried.
And I would just add one other point that I think is oftentimes overlooked in this, and I just want to take a point. We don't talk about it hardly ever, but anytime we burst a bubble, it's never an easy thing. If you add, for example, third grade section, it's generally people moving. It's tearing up class lists. It's tearing up building schedules, especially, 1, 2, 3 bubbles burst at a building. It becomes very hard on the staff and the administration over the summer because of the fact of all the changes that have to happen on that. There's a great impact that it has on the buildings, and I think one of the things that goes unnoticed is how our building administrators handle that, and their staff. They are very flexible. It's never easy, but I think they look at the fact of, these are providing the best opportunities for our students to learn, and they oftentimes do a wonderful job in very small windows of time of getting, changing classrooms, redoing schedules, redoing class lists, moving people to make sure that we can accommodate these changes of these bubbles that burst.
Dr. Hines, I know that there is the opportunity to increase a full-time staff member, and there's options at times in conjunction with the PREA to add an assistant teacher. Can you describe and define for the board when those options may present themselves and when they're available?
So, for example, if we think about our most recent situation with grade 2 at Franklin, we were watching that as one of the bubble classes throughout the spring and into the summer. And it just so happened that the little guy that pushed us one student over showed up on the first day of school. So, we had to have a conversation, certainly with the building principal, the grade level teachers, to take a look at that particular class to decide, do we go the route of a TA and provide immediate relief? Because if you think about it, that one little boy is going to be, one classroom is going to be one student over our maximum. Well, the teachers at that grade level were concerned because that group of students in the previous year, they had a variety of needs. They had some high students, they had some students that struggled academically, they had some behavior challenge. You're dealing with younger students during those critical early years of literacy development. And we dove into the data, and we decided that we were going to open that section, but also work with our new Assistant Director of Special Ed and Pupil Services to put some RTI supports in place to really work to try to gain more than a year's worth of growth in a year's time. So rather than just giving that relief valve of smaller classes, we really wanted to examine what it was we were going to be doing in those smaller classes to drive that instruction and kind of close some of those gaps that the first grade teachers who are now the second grade teachers were concerned about. So really, instead of it just being one way or the other, we're really going to start to do a kind of a case-by-case look, use data, talk to teachers that have worked with the kids. Certainly the age level of the students is going to be a factor. K1, 2, I would like rooms to be a little bit smaller, especially if we have kids challenged academically to keep up with their same age peers. So we're not continuing to have those concerns as they matriculate through our system. So those were some of the key factors in helping us make that decision.
And when contractually are we allowed to go the route of teaching assistant?
Really, it's a conversation, and that past practice has been, as I said a little while ago, in some buildings at some grade levels, they've wanted to go the route of the TA. Others have said, let's do a teacher. And it really is after, up until the first day of school, we will pop a section. Once the school year starts, it's a conversation. And then now we're going to add that data piece and really look at a grade level need to help us decide whether we're going to go the route of TA or teacher.
And the thing I always add here, the teacher's contract does not require us to split classes. It requires us to have a conversation at certain points. But that's one thing all 7 board members ought to be clear on. There is nothing in the contract that requires us to split classes.
Thank you.
Joe, I had a couple of comments on this. I was very interested to see this, and I think this does arise from a comment I made during some previous budget cycle where I said, one of the things that I care about are the number of adults per student. It should not, over a long period of time, require more and more adults to teach the same number of students. So one of the first things I did when I got this is I took out my calculator and I started dividing and coming up with the ratio. And I've realized, as we've talked this evening, that my numbers are a little off. But in looking at this, it looks like we have been between 11 and 12 students per teacher during all of these years that are here. It looks like the ratio declined a little bit right at the beginning, but is coming back up again. And so my worry that I would see kind of a continuous drop of that ratio year after year after year turns out not to be true, and I'm pleased with that. So it looks like we did have a drop in the ratio a little bit, in other words, more adults per student. Over the first couple of years, in part because of some hires we made, in part because of bad luck with the bubble sections, but we're kind of stabilizing. And that was sort of what I wanted to know, and the answer is less worrisome than I thought it was going to be. So I appreciate that.
Any other comments on this particular report? Again, thank you, Joel, for your help in this. Dr. Hines, next topic on the agenda is the PIAC. And if you can take us through that?
You bet. So you probably remember a few years back, those of you that were on the board, I'm sure Dr. Bender talked with you about the Performance Evaluation Reform Act, also known as PARA. started back in 2012, and it really was an effort kind of for larger educational reform linked to the Common Core standards. So we wanted higher, clearer, fewer standards for students, but we also wanted better ways in which to evaluate the effectiveness of our teachers and our principals. So back in September of 2012, requirements changed in terms of who could evaluate principals, what the evaluations were going to need to be comprised of. And what I'm going to talk with you about briefly tonight is I'm going to give you an overview of that legislation. We have newer board members and a brand new board member here. So you have an understanding of the process that I'm going to go through and just how rigorous the process is and how serious I do take principal evaluation. And then I'm going to update you throughout the course of the year as I tackle kind of another section or requirement within principal evaluation. And really this is just for your information because I think it is important for you to understand, again, how robust these changes have made principal evaluation. So I'll go back to that in just a moment, but as you also know, we are currently working, we started the work last spring under the guidance of Lori Lopez, to take a look at our teacher evaluation document. And that is something that we're going to spend the next 2 years crafting. So it too will meet the muster of the new legislation and really be well defined and articulated. So what's happening right now is, this summer I was reading the 2013-14 evaluation docs written by Dr. Bender, because one of the things you need to do when you start this process every year is to review the areas of strength and opportunities for improvement from the previous year's evaluation. And you need to use that information to help set goals and drive the conversation in terms of goal setting. So I've read through all the 2013-14 evaluations. We also need to take a look at the job descriptions to make sure everybody is very clear on what it is they are expected to be doing while a principal or an assistant principal within our district. And those instruments have been, and job descriptions have been refreshed in the recent past. Then there's a conversation that needs to take place, those performance standards that we used largely to build some of my evaluation tool just this last Thursday. We review the Illinois performance standards for school leaders, in which there are 6. And then what the principals are doing is they're looking at those 6 standards, and then there's components within those standards to say, which are we going to focus on? Where do I feel solid, or look at these are real areas of strength for me, and where do I have opportunities to grow as a professional, to do maybe more professional development, or to just try to target those areas so I continue to grow as a leader that can then build that capacity in their staff. So we engage in a nice conversation about those Illinois performance standards during the goal-setting conference. So with this new legislation and this new document, we talk about those strengths and areas for growth, and then we collaboratively write our goals for the year. This year, because we have that 1-year roadmap, we're really looking at the district goals, because the district goals can't be enacted just because I want them to. I need to make sure that the folks that are working with the teachers and with the students are also on board to make those goals happen. So we use the roadmap as a guide in terms of goal development and areas that we're going to focus. So the district goals are discussed, and then the principals really have been very, I think, very thoughtful in terms of additional things that they're working on within their building. It might be a behavior plan that they want to put in place. It might be, for example, at Emerson, it's SOAR. It has to do with their social, emotional, and behavioral goals for the building. So they each bring a few things that they're passionate about or that they know that their staff needs to work on kind of to the table. The principals then create these electronic portfolios that are outstanding, and I'm actually going to work through my evaluation document with a digital portfolio as well that I will share with you midway through and at the end of the year, where I'm going to collect these artifacts, what it is that we're really working on that aligns to those performance standards. So that's kind of goal setting. And it takes a good couple hours to work on, and it is a lot of rich conversations where we get targeted. Because too many goals, you're not going to do many well, so we want to get really targeted. Then throughout the year, I have to do at least 2 formal observations with each of the principals. And that could be anywhere from leading a faculty meeting to a PST or an individual problem-solving meeting. It could be a parent night that they're hosting. But I get in and watch them in their element. And that's exciting. I have some of those scheduled starting very early into October, and I can't wait to do that piece of it. I'm not sure that the principals are quite as excited, but maybe they are, I'm not sure. But at least 2, and we schedule those in advance. We identify, and we're required to identify at least one specific objective that we're going to focus on, and this is all through that para-PIAC legislation. After I observe, then I provide written feedback, and we will have a post-conference. So I have 10 days to do my write-up. We have a post-conversation where we talk through what I observed, areas that I thought were right on target. We have a collaborative conversation about maybe when they reflect on the observation, what they didn't think went the way they had hoped, or any improvements they might make. And I always frame it as, if you were a kindergarten teacher and you had to do this again in the PM, because when you're in kindergarten, the morning class may get the rough shot, and the PM class maybe gets that refinement piece. How would you refine that lesson? And I think that's where a lot of growth really occurs, during that collaborative conversation. So we will have written feedback that we'll discuss in a face-to-face post-conference at least twice a year. Then there's what's also exciting with this new legislation is unlimited informal observations. So I'm calling them walk and talk days, where some of them are scheduled and some of them won't be scheduled, but where I'm going to spend time within the buildings. So Madeline, my secretary, is plugging those times into my calendar. So I'm in the building multiple times each month, just kind of walking and seeing the curriculum in action, seeing teachers in their element, and how the principals are interacting. So I will do a lot of formal observations to continue to see the principals doing their work, their important work within a building. Then in the spring, we do a summative conference where we pull information from the informals. If I'm going to use information from the informals in summative ratings, I have to give them written feedback, so that's a component. During my formal observations, everything is kind of evidence. When we have our administrative cabinet meetings, interactions like Kevin's job tonight at a board meeting, like what a great video. You bet that's going to be something I'm going to want to talk about in his evaluation. So we'll have a summative conference, and at that time, that's when they're going to share their electronic portfolios, where they'll show all the evidence that supports the work they've been doing in those 6 performance standard categories. I will write a narrative. They will also write a self-assessment on how their year has gone and how they think they've done in terms of reaching the goals that they've set for themselves and for the building. And then the last component within that summative has to do with the student growth piece. So they're going to set student growth goals, and there's going to be data that they're going to monitor over time, and we'll track if they exceeded the targets, if they were above the targets, on target or below target. And then all of that is factored into a summative rating. I'll go into much more detail, probably around February, so you have a sense of that piece. But I really wanted you to have a global understanding of how comprehensive this process has become as a result of the para legislation of 2012.
Do you have to do the same process with all your administrators?
I do. So it'll be all building principals. The building principals will follow this process with their assistant principals. And then we have a process to be discussed starting next week with the central office. So we're probably going to do some revising of formats because they don't fall under that same para legislation the way the teachers and principals do if you're a central office staff member. So I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think I have all of that. But something else I just wanted to tell the board, I think it kind of links to what we're doing in terms of this new beginning, is our new principal, Stephanie Daly, over at Washington, will receive mentoring because she's a new principal. And we'll also probably loop our new assistant principal, Emily Leck, into formal mentoring. Once or twice a month, somebody will come out that is a retired superintendent that teaches the principalship to mentor our new administrators. But coming in as a new superintendent, I think we have an opportunity to do some renorming and some learning together. So kind of unanimously, the AC, which is about 23 members, right? 21 or 23 members, give or take, they have all agreed that they want to engage in some learning together as well. And we're going to do a book study, and they have been giving me ideas in terms of what they would like to learn more about. So I have some ideas, but I'm seeking feedback from the principals and assistant principals so we can continue to grow together. And we're going to start our own professional learning community as an administrative team to just continue to grow our skills. Because I'm all about continuous improvement. We may be good or really good, but we want to be great. Or what's greater than great, I don't know, but that's our target. So that's going to be happening throughout this year. I think really for as long as I'm here. I'm going to make them learn with me.
Great.
Do you have any questions for me?
Just one question for you, Lori, and this sounds really great. On the student growth goal for principals, are those set individually? Does everybody have the same student growth goal? If they're set individually, who proposes them?
It's a very good question. So last year, I think everybody set them individually. There may have been some buildings that had a very similar goal. They worked closely with Dr. Lopez to identify the areas in which they were going to focus and the assessment tool they were going to use. It could be Ames Web, it could be MAP. I noticed in reading some of the administrators' evaluations, it could be, Renaissance Star data, MComp data. So we have, as you know, a lot of data, and they, depending on where their areas of focus, they're going to find a data source. You guys are big with metrics. They're going to find a data source that's going to show student growth. So it does vary based on their building scores or the building's area of focus. It'll be curious now that we have this unified MAP goal to do status and growth, if we're going to standardize that, and it makes good sense because the principals are really paying close attention and they've begun the work with their staff to use that MAP data to target individual student growth. I foresee, and Lori chime in, I can see you're like waiting, that we probably will have some type of a MAP, a unified MAP data at the elementary and then at the junior high. Anything, Dr. Lopez, you want to grab a microphone and chime in? Or?
I think, one of the things that we want to target this year in terms of our goal setting with our principals is our interdependence as we look toward achieving the goal that we're going to bring forward to the board around MAP 2. So it'll be all hands in.
So just go ahead.
Just to follow up on John's question, and maybe you said this and I just didn't grasp it. Would for sort of student growth, then, are you saying that? Let's just take the two middle schools as an example. Will the principals there use a similar measurement? I realize there could be different numbers there, but would they use a similar measurement, or do they have the latitude to pick different measures to be graded on their growth of the students?
It's a little bit of both. They're going to have MAP that will be similar, but then they're also going to be able to use other data sources if there's a building-specific goal that they're trying to focus on, based on multiple data points that says there might be a need to do more work with math at one school and reading at another. We're going to want them to be able to customize that goal setting based on what the data set for their school is demonstrating and what they as professionals are really trying to focus on achieving within their building.
I imagine you would have to have some weighting, however, correct? Because if district-wide we want to utilize the MAP test as a measure of driving student achievement, I think across the district you're going to have some uniformity on that and yet allow for a percentage of individual billing necessities. So there'll have to be some weighting in the evaluation, correct?
So in terms of this, now that we're in the third year of using student growth data, 30% of their overall rating will be linked to whether or not that their student growth targets are met. So is that in terms of the weighting that you're talking about, or?
Of that 30%, how much of that 30% will be to MAP and how much of that will be to these other measures? So I'm thinking of that 30%, you could have 75% of that 30% primarily with the MAP and 25%. Yeah, not to confuse.
No, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
What's problematic right now with the deadlines that the data has to be and these meetings have to take place is, in the infinite wisdom of the Illinois State Board of Education, we have to have these meetings done before we will have our spring MAP data. We won't even have administered spring MAP. So MAP, unfortunately, is not a data source that we'll be able to use within one calendar year. Some districts are looking at going spring to spring or fall to fall, but then you've got different cohorts of kids. So that's a conversation. I know from a legislative lunch that I attended a week or so ago now, The IASA, which is the Illinois Association of School Administrators, is really trying to lobby to have how this process ends move to a later date, so we can have, access to the MAP scores or Scantron, if you're a Scantron district, to factor in to how we measure student growth. So keep your fingers crossed for that one. It's on the docket for this fall.
It just makes common sense that you wouldn't want to judge a teacher on 3 months worth of data when there's 4 or 5 months.
Exactly, and that's the pushback if you're a teacher, because it is linked, come 2016-17, that's a big part of your teacher evaluation.
Right.
It's 30% of your overall rating linked to student data. We've got to have, garbage data in, garbage data out. We've got to have the right data to really, if we're going to use it in such a way. So more to come. We've got a couple of years to see what might change between now and then. But the process that we're going to follow hopefully won't change, but maybe those dates will. Anything else, Dr. Lopez?
Yeah, and I think I was just thinking, obviously we're going to be looking at your performance and student growth, and if you think about, if you said like at Dan's company, if the chairman said they want their net income to be higher, and then that's going to go push down to the next level and the next level. So all I'm thinking is, if we're saying we want to measure student performance, so we're going to do that at a high level, that then you would want to have those same expectations going down to the next level, so that we're everybody's motivated towards the same goal.
Well, they're all in the boat with me. So I shared with them at the ESC team Monday. I gave them a copy of my evaluation. I said, my advice is print it, highlight it, and then your sections, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to work together to make sure we achieve these goals. So you are absolutely right.
Okay.
One for all and all for one.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you, Dr. Hines. Next topic on our agenda is board member school visits. As long as I've been on the board, we have done a board outreach to the community. By tonight, as evidenced by tonight, we are in one of our schools. We are visiting the school, mingling with the community, seeing the principals, and getting some background as to what the schools are up to, and getting a good flavor as to what themes are happening in our district. We have, over the coming year, one meeting, not necessarily per month, but it turns out that way, where we will be visiting each and every one of our schools. We have a news release that was in our packet that I believe also went out, correct, Bernadette?
End of August.
Yeah. Showing very clearly how we will be in the community, visiting these schools, and at the same time, when appropriate, hopefully we'll be walking through the schools, escorted by Scott, showing us different areas of improvement, specifically the field meeting, which is going to be October 27th, and I'd like us to spend perhaps a bit of time looking at some of the new construction. I know I haven't gone over there, but I'd be certainly very interested to see some of the magnitude of what has been occurring. We can, Dr. Hines, maybe we can build that in somehow.
I'm actually just jumping into the document where we're tracking, and so we'll do it at 6:30.
Yeah, it should be on that agenda. I have talked with
I'm going to
Madeline
check,
about that.
And of course, we'll be at Carpenter on April 27th. I think that would be another hot item to, no pun intended, to
yes,
to definitely to review.
Absolutely.
If there's any other things that pop up. Now, we have been meeting up at the far northern reaches of the district. A central location, just making it easy for everybody. I mean, Jefferson is a wonderful facility, don't get me wrong, but I think it may exclude some folks from being there. I want to be as inclusive as possible. I know we had spoken about this some months ago. Essentially located facilities such as Lincoln, Washington, Franklin, certainly would be more conducive to incorporating some of that from the community versus Jefferson, which is a little bit more difficult to reach. Any further thoughts on that?
You know, we travel to 8 schools, so that takes up, if we were having one board meeting a month, which most of the time we are, that takes up 8 of those board meetings. So we're looking at a central location pretty much for 4 board meetings.
Well, about 6.
And then there's some special board meetings in there, so we could add a couple to that. You know, again, if we want to keep that centrally located, you know, what we could do is take it away from Jefferson and, you know, put it on those off, I don't want to call them off nights, but, you know, on those nights when we're not at a school. You know, we could just say we're going to hold those there for a while we were holding them at the field gym. And then we could also hold them at possibly the Carpenter gym. But as far as a location within any of our buildings, Dr. Borelli, if we have it in one of our schools, we're pretty much stuck in the gym. And maybe I shouldn't say stuck, but the area that we would have to have in order to seat the people and to have this set up would be in a gym. And I know there were some concerns about noises and audio and things like that. Right. Yeah. Other than that, there's really no place within any one of our facilities that we would be able to have, you know, a quote board meeting location other than a gym.
Yeah. All right. Well, always on the.
Sorry, I can't do any better than that, but that's
always
where
on
we're at.
always on the lookout to improve,
Yes.
you know, outreach to the community. So, all right. Any other comments or thoughts on this particular item? Not hearing any. Scott, that leads us right into security updates.
Yes, and what I put on the security update for you this evening was the Sonatrol and the Raptor update. And as we get started in this, I wanted to let you also know that I included Lucas Cowden, our network manager, in on this. He helped me write this. He has just been instrumental in getting these cameras up, getting the information to the administrative team for viewing the cameras, for logging onto the computers. My role in both the Sonatrol and the Raptor was really a logistics role. You know, where do the screens go? How do we get power to them? Where do we set the Raptor? What shelving do we need to build in order to get that up? And then from the technical standpoint, Lucas and MJ have been very helpful in allowing us to do that. So the cameras are in. We're recording. We're seeing people as they walk in the building. We're keeping an eye on them when they come in the building. We have gone back with the cameras and you know, we have used those to find a few people that have been hanging around the buildings that shouldn't be hanging around the buildings. As you know, we've had a couple of incidents that we've actually been able to get the people on camera. The recording devices, the staff has been trained on how to use those. The principals have been trained on how to use those, so they can go in and review any section of the video and cameras that have been out there. So we've been doing that. We are going to, and I will be in contact with the Niles and Park Ridge Police Department here in the next week or so. Lucas has told me today that we do have the IP addresses for them so that they can log onto the buildings and in case of an emergency can get a live picture of what's going on at the building. So we'll get that taken care of here in the next week or so. And then we also are going to go back through, I think one of the things that we talked about earlier with the police department was to have them go back through, along with our administrative team, to review the angles of the cameras, to make sure that we're catching what we want. Here at Roosevelt, one of the new benches that the PTO people put up, they right after they put it up, some people came up and pretty much tore it apart. And the camera angle was off by, and we couldn't see who it was. So we just need to make some adjustments with that, and we knew that was going to happen. So now that we've been looking at them for a month or so, we're pretty solid on where we'll do that. So we'll get those cameras adjusted and get ready to go. The Raptor system, we've had a little bit of downtime with the Raptor system, pretty much software related, and the policy at that point in time is to hold the people's license, give them a badge to get into the school so that they come back, and at least we know who's in the building at that time. That's one of the key things with the Raptor system. In the case of an emergency, a fire, anything like that, we know who's in the building. So we're still tracking that. Lucas has done a good job with that, and those systems are up and running. It's going pretty well. I think the secretaries would agree that it's added a little bit of work, but it has not been major, and we do have a much better comfort level of who's in our building, and we're certainly tracking that better. So with that, I will take any questions that you have for me.
Scott, the Sonatrol, is that, so does that have cameras that are used for sort of
looking at people as they're being granted access into the building during the day when staff and students are there?
Yes, that's correct, Robin. What we do with that is we have a camera at each door where students come in so that we can see what's happening outside of that door as students gather out there. And then on our entrances, we have cameras so that when people come into the building and once the secretary buzzes them in, they look up at the monitor and they can see that person and make sure that person is coming directly to the office so that we can track them from there. So that's the areas that we're looking at.
Great.
Scott, I have 3 questions. One, after a review with the Niles and Park Ridge Police Department, is it possible that we may find some blind spots and have to add some cameras and its associated costs?
Yes.
The second thing is, Scott Zimmerman brought up at a previous meeting a very, what I thought was a thoughtful or insight. We have these cameras, and these cameras are a deterrent. If we publicize the fact and made it very well known that we have this obvious deterrent, you'd have to be pretty dumb to go into a place where it's under surveillance. So that, to me, would be a deterrent on top of a deterrent. So how are we doing with advertising this important addition to our security upgrades? And then the final question is, we had a presentation about 5 months ago, Mr. Tim, and he gave us a punch list of security upgrades that were going to help the district improve its overall security. And I know that we've made some steps toward fulfilling this list. I was just wondering if by the next meeting we could have a copy of the list, what has been completed, what needs to be completed, and what's in the pipeline as to how about completing those items on that list.
The answer to the first question about the additional cameras is yes. There's a possibility that we will go ahead and add additional cameras as we review what we're looking at. So I think that that's a very good possibility. I have no idea how many at this time, but I would anticipate that there will be some additional cameras.
Do you think that they will be difficult to add,
No.
running wires and such?
No, they really won't be that difficult to add. We've got the NRV recording devices are stationed within areas in the building where our, I don't know, MJ, what are those rooms called? Where we have all of our network, our server room. Thank you. Sorry about that. Our server room. So they're in there, and we can get the cameras in there pretty easily. So we'll review those, and if it's recommended, really by either the police department or the administrator in the building to have additional cameras, we will put those in.
Great.
Yep, absolutely. As far as advertising, we don't have signs or anything that says that these buildings are under video surveillance. We can certainly do that if the board's wish is to do that. We can. You want to add something, Lauren?
I just am thinking back to when we had our traffic safety and our community safety meeting, and we had our local law enforcement partners there, and we asked that very question. And the chief just said it's really up to us if you want to advertise that. Some folks choose to. Some folks like to keep it kind of under the radar, and then they just use the tool if they need it. It's really up to us if we want to incur the cost of signs, and then if we want to have signs, posted around the buildings at these different locations.
I can't imagine that there wouldn't be some data out there about places that do advertise, not just for schools, but for stores. What is the difference between places that say this place is watched and the places that don't say that?
Yeah.
So I wonder if the gentleman who
Tim,
sold us that, if he would know that and have a recommendation for us. I'd hate to just blindly hope that it would have an effect when it might have the opposite effect, potentially.
Yeah. And I'm going to go to, he has a security summit all day on Thursday, and I will be going to that security summit, and I can certainly discuss it with him and other people at that summit as to what they're doing. At this point, I don't know which one would be leading the pack, signs or no signs. I can find out for you.
I'd be interested if there are, especially if there are some good research studies out. I don't know if he subscribes to, Sonatrol Weekly or whatever, but if there are some hardcore data on that would be really, really powerful for us.
Absolutely. Like I say, I'll be at that security summit, and I'll do that. I also belong and run a couple of facility groups throughout the state of Illinois, and I've got about 148 districts I can reach out to on an
Great.
email. I'll be happy to do that and figure out where we are with that as well.
And, there's more than one way to communicate that. We can have local signs, but, getting something in the local newspaper, having them actually do a story on some of our security upgrades, an emphasis on security going forward. I think it would be a good story, number one, if they would take it, but number two, just getting that information out into the public through any means possible, including the web, if we decide to go in that direction.
Absolutely.
Show
I
pictures
will
of the
work
kids
on
in
that.
handcuffs. Got caught.
Yeah, we need a criminals.
Just had
Anybody want
somebody
to
the other night.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And then your third question, Dr. Borelli. Yes, absolutely. I think it's a good time to do that at the next board meeting. So what I will do is I will get each of you a copy of the RETA security report. I thought that I had provided that to you. Does everyone have a copy of that or not? The RETA security report, the final report that we got from them.
I don't think I ever got
Okay, I will resend that to everyone, and then I will come back to you on the 27th of October, I think, is the next meeting.
Well, I gotta see when, that agenda is getting.
Is it getting full? Okay.
Yeah.
Then we will review the agenda at ESC team.
On Monday.
On Monday.
Tony, what report are you talking about? Because I remember he had a full report for us on something.
Yeah, it would be the report that he presented to us at Carpenter last year when he
Yeah,
came.
it was some time ago, but I
Yes.
don't know if we got that full report. What we got was the executive summary.
I believe you may be right about that. Yeah, I will make sure that does everyone want a copy of the full report, I'm assuming then?
Yeah.
Okay, I will provide that, and then we will discuss at team on Monday about what would be the best time to come back. And at that point, I will give you kind of a running tab of what we have done, what has to be done, and where we're at with the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for me? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Scott. It leads us up to our consent agenda. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? There should be a couple. Becky, I think you have one comment to make on the consent agenda. Student fees.
We've updated our percentage of collections between this year and last year. And if I can actually get to that exact page, you will see that we have, actually I think it's under memo of information, not under the consent agenda.
I think it is under memo of
I think it's,
information.
yeah, I
back
think
in-
it's tab 14, yeah, I'm trying to get there.
Well, anyway, yeah. Our collections this year through the use of InfoSnap is greatly improved. In fact, we've collected, as of September 10th this year, or last year comparing to September 16th of this year, an additional $108,000 in student fees. So I think the use of InfoSnap has certainly been beneficial this year as people went through and corrected online their student information, and before they were done, in essence, checked out by paying and finalizing that by paying their student fees. So we were really pleased at that additional collection rate. We have sent our first letters, as the memo from Brian Imhoff states. We've already sent out our first letters to parents who did not pay their fees. So.
Yeah, at this time last year, it was well over $100,000. Great. Any other comments on the consent agenda? If not,
I actually have one question.
Please. Go ahead,
Dave. Yeah, I was just wondering about these applications. I was wondering, first of all, by whom are we being recognized? And secondly, do these applications cost anything?
They do not cost anything, I know that for sure. And the recognition of schools, I believe, is through the Illinois State Board of Ed. I'm trying to find where you are.
Recognizing that we exist. Toward the end of the consent agenda, it's all these packet.
Oh, yeah, yep. Those are the ones. We report that to the board, Illinois State Board of Ed.
That's it, okay.
Becky, I just had two questions, and maybe everybody knows the answer to these, but just looking at sort of the expenses, there's a vendor, Klein Hall and Associates Professional Service.
It's our auditor.
Auditor?
Our third-party independent auditor.
Okay. And then just one other question. It's there was so all the other schools for their postage, they pay the postal service, but Lincoln's listed as a vendor. It's just called reserve account. Why is that different than the other schools?
Well, it actually is the same. It's just the description that happened to be input at that particular point in time. They have there's a reserve account set up for the district, and as schools need to draw down on that. So I just think it's the description makes it different. It's not different operations than any other building.
So it's the reserve account is a reserve account with the postal service? Or?
Correct. And when they want to fill their postage meters, they just draw down on that. Versus us having to wait for a board meeting to be able to fill postage for them. So it's convenience sake, actually, for the buildings to be able to continue to operate.
So why does that show up as an expense then? If is it some, like when you say a reserve account, I would think
We wrote a check and mailed it off to the U.S. Post Office to go into our reserve account.
Okay.
It's prepaid postage.
Okay. Yeah, it's just an odd, when I look at vendors, I just think of vendors. Reserve account looks like a very sort of vague description of something.
Yeah, I will talk to my accounts payable person.
Okay.
It's almost like a savings account, right? Reserve account. Oh.
I won't use.
We don't earn interest on it, believe me.
People would maybe use.
Okay. Any other comments? None. How about we start? I'll need a motion to accept the consent agenda.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the consent agenda of September 22, 2014, which includes the personnel report, bills, payroll, and benefits, approval of financial update for the period ending August 31, 2014, annual application for recognition of schools, and destruction of audio closed minutes, of which there are none.
Second.
Starting with Bob.
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
Dan?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Very prompt.
Leads us up to approval of minutes. There are 4 specific dates that are included in our minutes. Any comments on the minutes? And not hearing any, we'll take somebody move to...
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the minutes from the Committee of the Whole, Finance, on September 8, 2014, special board meeting on September 8, 2014, regular board meeting on August 25, 2014, and closed session on August 25, 2014.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, starting with Dathan.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And Dan?
Present.
Okay. All righty. Leads us up to liaison report. Was there any ELF? There you are.
I attended the ELF meeting after the Roosevelt PTA meeting, and so I missed the beginning part of the meeting because I was at Roosevelt. So when I got there, they were really just honing in on the casino night, the Aloha theme, and I know, Becky, it's your favorite place on earth. It's your Disney World. So I really hope that you all will attend. It sounds like a great event. They're working right now on the live auction items. So if you have anything to donate, or if you know anyone that has tickets, timeshares, they are looking for items. And we are going to increase the likelihood that people are going to come and to also save some money, they're going to do away with those small little RSVP invitations. They're going to do it online. They're looking into ways they can do it online, and they are going to do one flyer per youngest or oldest and only in a backpack. And we know we've kind of moved away from that in years past, but we want to give it a try to see if it has an impact in terms of event participation. And I think that is really all they were focused on. They talked a little bit about the market day and the farmers market, but as you can imagine, it sounds like January is far away, but we're already approaching October. So they're just looking to get that set up. And then one other conversation they had, we're starting to think about how to entice more and more teachers to write for grants. And they've been focusing solely on innovation. So we started a conversation with them in terms of if we broaden that just a little to encompass 21st century and the 4 C's, collaboration, critical thinking, cooperation, and I'm forgetting one, tired, but the 4 C's. And they wanted to learn a little bit more about that. So the next ELF meeting, I'm going to share that information with them because then maybe we'll have even more applicants, apply for these wonderful grants.
One thing they really need to do a little better job at is reaching out to people that have donated in the past, because those people will donate again if you ask them. And, they get new chairs, and I think that just gets lost. And
They circulated a list of, I think, 10 vendors that they've used in the past that they've confirmed. So you should probably maybe follow up with Carolyn to see.
Well, we always donate products,
Okay.
and I've reached out to them in the past.
Good.
So, but they're
So
not
you're saying
reaching
more
out to me.
proactively.
They need to be doing that, because if it's just me, think about all the products they could be getting.
Okay.
Sustainability?
Oh, I went to that meeting, and we had a great meeting at Lincoln, and there was also a fun cross-country meet, so it was complete mayhem. But we are going to, it's a tough call because it's things we want to do, but it's also, one-to-one initiative, and there's just so much going on. And Dr. Lopez and I were there, and we did make some progress where the principals are going to look at devices in the to separate out garbage and find out what would work best for them, how many units, and come up with a cost. And then I attend the PTO board president meeting, and we're going to kind of pitch it and see if maybe the PTOs would help with the cost of that, which I really think they would love to do. And we're talking about under $500 per school. So I'm excited that we have progress, but it is difficult conversations with composting and things like that. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Okay. Lori, anything else to add on the sustainability? Vicki's got it all.
I think Vicki mentioned it all. Our dreams right now are bigger probably than our time. But one of the things that we committed to this year was taking small steps where we knew that students could see progress, and then looking forward to mapping that into something maybe more strategic in the future.
May I share your nickname for the club?
Our nickname for the club? What's our nickname?
The Little Red Hen Club. Oh. If you know the children's story, everyone wants to eat the bread, but it's harder to get everybody involved in making the bread. So we have very large dreams, and now it's a matter of, as you said, taking small steps to figure out who's going to help make that bread. So it's a good cause, but we just need the workforce to get behind it.
I know that when Andy first raised this, and Scott and I and Dr. Bender got together and we sat down and talked about this, to make this a success long term, it really needs to be embedded in the culture of the district. Is there an outline, or you're obviously in the process of that, but going forward, how is that going to be developed? Can you share that?
Short term, we had identified 2 goals. We were focused on a waste-free lunch, And then we were also focused on improving the recycling program just throughout the school. We are continuing to work on waste-free lunch with the help of Mr. Mackel and his custodial team. We feel like we have some nice things in place to support building-wide recycling. We're still addressing some little hiccups here and there. But in terms of waste-free lunch, we thought that we had better start by focusing on student behavior, simple things that we can do that are related to student behavior. And the specific thing that we decided to target was the sorting of garbage after lunch. Beyond that, we have mapped out what a total waste-free lunch might look like, what some action steps might look like connected to that. And we've started to talk about student education, which is, of course, embedded in our curriculum, but also just additional student education that we might do for kids around the lunch hour.
Yeah, and
She has a whole shared Google document with action items where everyone can put feedback. I mean, it's very organized.
Yeah.
The issue that we're having is that the sustainability committee is having a sustainability problem. we have more dreams right now than momentum, right? So we decided, wait, we're biting off more than we can chew. When we go around the room and say what our dreams are, everybody has something specific, right? But when we go around the room and say, okay, who could make a commitment to make this dream come true, it's quiet. And it's not that people aren't passionate about it, it's that we really are relying on a group of volunteers to carry out something that's got a lot of legs. You know, when you start talking about student education and implementing district-wide recycling and really doing something like a waste-free lunch, that it's got a lot more components to it than yes, let's do this. So we have a lot of enthusiasm for it right now, but we're having a harder time drumming up a core group of consistent volunteers to support us with implementation.
Scott, one thing that came up was that we would like to have maybe a custodial manager, or somebody from your side of things there, because I think they will be the ones that tell us if even we're on base. That would be helpful.
Yeah,
for the
I
next
normally
meeting.
go to those meetings. I just had an issue in one of the buildings that I wasn't able to make it last Thursday, so
But they were even asking for a custodian to come there and help us out.
Yeah, we could provide that if we needed to. I mean, I think if I'm there, that should be a fair representation of that.
And then I think the other piece in terms of waste-free lunch, from a bidding perspective, because there's a cost from Arbor to go waste-free. So that has to be, doing that this year, that wasn't budgeted for. So if we know that that's something we want to do in years to come, when we go out to bid, or however that process works, Becky and Scott, we have to build that in to see what it would cost additionally to make something like that happen.
Right, because if you go with a waste-free lunch, and Becky, I know that you're going to have to probably work on redoing the specs, but basically it means no disposable silverware, no disposable plates. So now you're using silverware, plates, you have to wash it. I mean, there's a lot more work from Arbor in order to get that to happen. So,
one last thing I should. One last thing I should add is I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. There are schools where the initiative is much more deeply implemented because of some of the kid clubs that are there, the student clubs, and then also because of a core group of volunteers who are able to support it right now in the lunchroom. So when we talked about how can we make this consistent across the district, that's where it became more challenging. So our commitment right now is to maintaining its momentum at sort of this club level, and then starting to do smaller things like the bins to help us continue to change student behavior.
And the science teachers at the junior highs came up with some great ideas for trying to get an ELF grant. And what a great idea to have a district-wide, some kind of sustainability effort where, maybe that's something they haven't looked at since they're looking at new ideas. So I thought that was kind of exciting.
Well, I'm sure this will continue to build momentum and continue to grow. So always interested in hearing how this will progress. Thank you. Dr. Hines.
So A12, it's the approval of my eval. Right? Did we do that one yet?
No.
Okay.
I skip something?
You did. That very
You may be working off the old agenda, Tony.
Wait a minute. Yeah, it's not on this one.
This would be the approval of the superintendent evaluation
Right.
tool from Thursday night.
Right. So on Thursday night, the board had a special board meeting where we had a representative from the Illinois Association of School Boards, Dr. Heinz, the entire board. We had a lengthy discussion on developing a document that will be utilized for evaluation of the superintendent's position going forward. This was and is a very extensive document, not utilized before, so this is not necessarily a trial mode, but certainly a unique time where we'll be utilizing this document. However, the way it's constructed with metric evaluation, and certainly with Dr. Heinz's input, it is extremely detailed, very thorough, expecting a lot, but I can tell you that we would never have created this document if we didn't feel that this would be completed in its utmost. So with our utmost confidence in Dr. Heinz, we will move forward. As it is I don't know why I don't have that sheet of paper. I got everything all stacked up here. Okay. But as it is an action item, as I stated the other night, we were going to have the entire board agree upon this document that we spoke about and crafted and created. And before we vote on it to incorporate it, I want to know if there's any comments or additions or anything. Nothing? I think we talked about it pretty thoroughly the other night. So that being the case, we'll need to have a motion and a second to accept this document that we created the other evening.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the superintendent evaluation tool for 2014-15.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Starting on, I think we go to Dathan. No? Bob? Bob. Let's go with Bob.
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
Danny?
Aye.
Thank you, Dan. All right.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Heinz.
Thank you.
I dropped these papers before, and I bet you it's in here someplace.
Sure it is. It's a lot of paper.
Yes.
Which is something we'll talk about in October.
I'm hoping.
Okay.
I'm hoping.
So is Madeline. All right. So a lot of little things to report for you. One being the Chromebook event, which, as you know, started just before the board meeting. And when I left, there were probably upwards of 45, 50 people. Do you have a count? Did you happen to count? But the room was packed. Oh my. So from the time I said my welcome to, by the time I left, 100. That's outstanding. That is just wonderful. So we had our first in a series of parent universities. I want to thank Roosevelt for hosting. I really enjoyed that video, and they really incorporated the Institute Day focus that we have, the eye of the third power, or the 3 eyes, into what they're doing, and that seems to be taking some legs and kind of running off into the buildings, which was very nice to see. I know Leslie just left, but I just wanted to commend the Leslie Lapping and the staff for at Jefferson and certainly at Roosevelt for just that very, very tragic passing of one of their developmental kindergartners, and just how beautifully that staff pulled together to support each other, support the new classroom teacher, brand new teacher in there, and to support the family. The funeral was today. We were able to hire some subs, and we sent some central office administrators to cover the 2 schools so they could attend what I was told was just a wonderful and moving service today. So you hate to say congratulations, but they did a wonderful job, and that they pulled together as a staff, which was just so nice to see. October 20th, just a reminder, we have the Legal Boot Camp with Hodges and Louisi, and these books are going to be ordered. The ones some of you may have are the 09 edition, so you can get rid of them. If you have it lying around, we'll get you new books. The ABCs of Board Service, we have solidified the date for October 29th. Bernadette and I will be working on ways to get additional information out to the public, because in the paper they had the phone number of the district to call in terms of petitions, and if you're interested in applying and moving through that process. And as you know from our past meeting, we are less involved than ever at the district level. It's become more centralized through the ROE. So we'll put something out soon, and Bernadette's going to work on that ABC flyer as well. I found out today that the Emerson and Lincoln students will appear on stage at the kickoff of the Park Ridge Civic Orchestra on October 29th, so watch for information regarding that event. And I believe that is all I had in terms of reports to share. There's several memos of understanding within this packet. Would you like me to walk through those, or are they're pretty self-evident? Okay, hopefully you've taken a look at those. And you should also find the October 20th board agenda with Hodges, and then the next agenda will be the 27th. That may change a little as we review it, as the date gets a little bit closer, but as you can see, it's got a number of points that we'll need to discuss on there in October. And that is it for me.
Now, Dr. Heinz, we have the special meeting in October and one board meeting, followed by one board meeting in November. I know that the 27th meeting is starting to get pretty busy, and I'm sure the November will carry over to get pretty busy. Do you foresee the necessity of an extra meeting in there at some point?
Not in October. We'll have to keep track of November, and when we have our next board planning meeting, we can take a look, or you can go into that shared Google Doc where we have the items. November is not nearly as heavy right now as October.
Things change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I do want to try to avoid these 6-hour marathon meetings that are just brutal. So if necessary, well, we'll keep an eye on things.
Yep.
And see how that pans out.
Great.
Alrighty.
That's it for me.
Alrighty. Any other comments or questions? Well, we took a hiatus from our closed meeting before, and we will need to go back into close. So prior to closing the open, I suggest that, number one, we take a 5-minute break. We come back, we go into our open. Just as a reminder for folks, the closed session will be for 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C1, which would be performance of individuals. 5 Illinois Compiled Statutes 122C2, salary schedules, and 5 Illinois Compiled Statutes 122C11, which would be potential litigation. We'll need, and
before you take a motion on that, Lori, are there any issues on closed session that do not fall within those 3 sections listed?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Can I ask one question too? I know this meeting's going long, but I have one quick question. Where do we sit with the calendar? I've heard a lot of rumblings and people asking me about that. Have we made a decision on that?
Oh, no, I can give you an update. So the internal calendar committee will convene on October 2nd, where we have a representative from 207 joining us. We will we'll learn about their process, and we will open that meeting for the internal committee. It is on the board agenda to talk about in October, so that'll be your chance to kind of weigh in. I'll report out on the October 2nd meeting. We have it down for you guys to talk about on the 27th of October, and then we'll figure out how we're going to proceed. Sometime within October and November, we will send out a community survey. That is what the feeder township districts are going to do. So the superintendents and I will collaboratively work on the survey for the community, and we will get that out. But that'll be part of our conversation in October.
All right, so the board will discuss it in the October 27th meeting, and when will the survey hit the parents?
We're going to finalize a date, or I'll have a date to share with you that the other feeder districts are leaning towards, because we're going to try to do it at a similar time frame. So it'll be some point in October. I don't have an exact date, but with my
sometime in October before the 27th meeting, some survey will be sent out.
And with I'm doing a monthly superintendent newsletter, so it'll go out at the end of the month. And one of the things that I'll be talking to the parents about in my newsletter is this committee and the process, and to let everybody know that despite the rumors, no decisions have been made. So I will give them kind of an overview of the plan moving forward, at least what we've developed so far for October.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes without saying, Lori, and I know you do this. The more you can do with this and communicate with people in the community and with parents and the proper people, and the less the board does with that, it's probably better.
Sure.
Well, if the survey goes out and the data comes back, will we have the data back in time and able to be analyzed in time for the discussion on the 27th? Is that the game plan going forward?
We'll do an electronic survey, so the data is available, pretty quickly. So if we want that data by the 27th, then I can reach out to the other superintendents in District 62, 63, to see what their timeline is. We didn't set a hard and fast survey date. We just said early fall.
But if I understand you right, Laura, you're not asking us to make a decision on October
No.
27th. You're
Correct.
planning to talk to us about the
Discussion.
issue for the first time on
Yes.
that day.
Correct.
So, I guess based on that, I don't feel a burning need to have the survey done by the first time we talk about it.
Okay, that's good to know.
Well, explain to me if
John, if I get my answer on that, the sooner we get the community's input though, and that Lori can have her recommendation, I would say the better. Just so she could have it tied up and have her involvement, so it doesn't linger into a lot of our meetings. I think that would be better.
I think it's good for it not to linger. On the other hand, I would very much not want us to make a decision on the 27th because I suspect that this is one of these issues where people are going to want to come and talk to us about it, and we're just going to have to listen to a lot of public comments. And, I think for members of the community to have an issue come up at a board meeting and have it decided that evening, they will tend to find out about it afterwards, and then they'll be very angry that they had no input, even if there was a survey going out beforehand. So my guess would be that, it's got to be at least a 2-meeting deal.
To some degree, I agree with John. However, I believe that the survey data should be available for the 27th. If we're going to have a discussion, I think we need to have the data to have that discussion about. And then I don't believe that we should necessarily vote on it that evening, but to have a robust discussion, I think we need to have the data. That's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that, there was, I believe, some angst associated with District 207's action, and I think it was because there was definitely a survey.
There was a survey.
I'm aware of that, but I don't think that there was a large amount of publicity supporting the fact that it was going to be, voted on, at the school board meeting, and so I think it was kind of, many people felt exactly as John said, that they became aware of it after the board had already set itself down, and then of course, I think there's, consternation on the board about, would you reverse your decision you already made type of situation. Right. So I would concur that I think it'd be very good to discuss it, give the community an opportunity to comment before action's taken.
And I think even more than that, possibly, I could see your recommendation on the 27th might be more of a process recommendation than it is an actual substance recommendation. So, for instance, I could see where this may be the kind of thing where in addition to doing the survey, we want to do some focus groups or we want to do some outreach to particular stakeholder groups just to make sure that, there is as much outreach as possible. And I want to make sure you have time to come to us with something like that and that we're not in a hurry to be done.
And I appreciate that because we're going to have our first meeting on October 2nd. So that's when we're going to get our internal committee. And that's the process that we typically follow to establish a calendar. It's nothing that's done in a one-shot deal. It takes multiple meetings to create a district-wide calendar. And then to have such a big decision to make in terms of are we aligning to the 207, are we not, are we meeting them halfway, I think it's going to take multiple meetings. But we can make sure to communicate, as I said I will with the superintendent memo that's going to go out to the whole community so they at least see that the process hasn't begun. It will unfold during October and November. And hopefully we can make a decision and approve the calendar in December, which is several months earlier than you typically do, because it's probably, in most districts in which I've worked, done around February. But we wouldn't want to wait potentially that long if we're going to make any big shifts. But
In my recollection, I thought we were approving the calendar even later than February, but that was my question. When does this decision need to be somewhat finalized? And that would be February, March?
For those of you that have been here for more than a couple of months, when when have you guys approved calendars in the past? Is it February, March, later?
I remember.
I did not want to give the impression that we wanted to rush to a decision. I am fine with that decision. If we get a presentation in November and voting on it a month later, whatever the case might be.
April.
The message I was just trying to deliver is more is that I want Lori, you to be heavily involved in it, and I want to make sure that if a certain party doesn't get the decision that they want, that they can't come back if there wasn't transparency. That's my larger issue.
Agreed.
That we pulled all the parties in, there was total transparency, people had an opportunity to talk, and then there was no rush to a decision, there was no meeting, quick meeting by the board, so that people had an opportunity to talk. One decision was made one way or the other, but everyone got a chance to be heard. And the voice of the and hear the voice in the ear of the administration.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think we're all on board with that, Danny.
All right.
Okay, so we are intended to go back into close with no intention of going back into open session. We will go into close for the aforementioned 3 reasons, and I will need a motion, and we'll take a vote to go back into closed.
Second.
Thank you, and we'll take a vote. Bob?
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
Danny?
Aye.
Okay, we'll take 5 minutes, and then we'll start back up again. Okay, Dan?